University of Florida. Professor Hu's work is focused on the interrelationship between transportation and land use with an emphasis on equity. She has extensive knowledge of real-world planning and policy efforts to promote just and prosperous cities, reduce socio-spatial inequity, and enhance environmental justice. Professor Hu has published extensively in prestigious urban planning and transportation journals, and she has led more than 1 million funded research projects supported by the National Science Foundation and other agencies. One example of the impacts of her research is FlexRide Milwaukee, which she'll be talking about today, which pilots a new microtransit service to address long-term transportation gap in the Milwaukee region. Her talk today will discuss FlexRide Milwaukee, its motivation, research, design, and performance evaluation. I will be fielding any questions you have on Zoom, so we can answer those at the end. And without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Professor Liu.
Thank you, Dr. Platt, and thank you, the audience in the room and on Zoom. As Dr. Platt introduced, that I am in urban and regional planning, and the topic is user-centered mobility solution to connect jobs and labor force. It might not make sense yet to people who are not in the planning field. So let me talk a little bit about my research background. How to scroll this down? Here we go. So as introduced, my research area is the interrelationship between transportation and land use. And as I said, like I focus on equity in accessibility. So all these are the keywords, but what is accessibility? Why accessibility is the focus when I say it's transportation, it's land use? When we think about transportation, it's you have a car, high-speed rail, airplanes, I was just complained about, or like bicycling on the streets, right? Those are the transportation services, transportation infrastructure for us to move. So we call that mobility. People who have cars, who can do air travel, they have higher mobility than those people who do not have cars. Okay, that's the transportation, that's the mobility part of it. Then we think about urban planning. It's also about proximity between U and B. I have to travel between A and B. I have to meet people. I have to go to grocery. I have to go to jobs, right? We have to travel, but we travel to where? How long is the distance? That's dominated, that's decided by the land use pattern, right? But some of the students might live around campus, so you have the proximity, you can walk to school. For me, I live 10 miles away from campus, but I have cars. So my accessibility is relatively okay. So although long distance, but mobility can help me to have a higher accessibility. Vice versa, if we think about some developing countries, no cars, relatively low service of transit. But for example, China, right? High density, my parents still bike everywhere. They don't have cars, but the land use pattern allow them okay accessibility. They can bike anywhere. They can bike to grocery, to shopping, to hospitals, everything, right? So their accessibility probably is relatively the same as me, although I have cars. So that's the reason I focus on accessibility. It's a combination of the transportation system and the land use pattern. Then at the intersection is accessibility. So that's my main research field. And I said I focus on equity in accessibility because this is my belief. This is my academic belief. Accessibility is an essential human right. So beyond, all those elevated life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, we also have the basic human rights for sheltering, for quality housing, for education, for healthcare, etc., etc. However, in the context of the United States, when the land use is so dispersed, when it's 10 miles away from a good health healthcare system for you, when jobs are sometimes 20 miles away, then without cars, without a good transportation system, then some people do not have that accessibility, that access to jobs, to healthcare, to those essential services. So in this context, the physical accessibility to these essential opportunities, to these essential services, I believe is a basic human right. Without that physical access, even the service is grand, is awesome out there, we don't have access. We don't use the opportunities and the services. And then that's accessibility. Wait, it doesn't scroll down. Can I make the first? No. So accessibility to a lot of things. Now we further zoom in and focus in one part of accessibility, which is accessibility to jobs. It's a vast research field. A lot of people have already done research in that, because access to jobs decides your economic prospects. If the jobs, however good jobs, is so far away from me, I don't have that jobs, then jobs is income, is social status, is the sustained, life sustaining wage, etc. So a lot of research on accessibility to jobs. I'm not an exception, and my research is also focused there. And here is the famous spatial mismatch hypothesis, which was proposed in 60s. Even today, people are still doing research in spatial mismatch hypothesis, including my research project supported by National Science Foundation. When they call in their solicitation, they want to talk about spatial mismatch. So it's a long-established research field. What's spatial mismatch? There are 3 causes of that. Again, first element, land use, housing segregation, which is pretty severe, as we can imagine in the United States. Disadvantaged and minority residents are segregated in some neighborhoods. So that's one of the causes. It's the land use, it's the housing component. The other component is where the jobs are. There is the common trend that jobs have moved to the suburban areas or grow faster in the suburban areas. So if jobs are growing further away from the central city, then we need transportation to connect these segregated neighborhoods with the growing jobs. If transportation is good, then no big deal, I can get there. If no transportation connection between jobs and housing, then it's a serious issue. So that's spatial mismatch, and that's the typical consequence when there is the mismatch. This is the conceptual model. Doesn't move. And now let's look at Milwaukee, and all these are the real data and the real surveys. And I moved from University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and that's the reason my project was in Milwaukee. This is 2010 census block group data, and I haven't found a clear map for the 2020 census, but you can imagine things did not change rapidly. So 2020 patterns should be pretty similar as 2010. On the screen right now, the color is kind of yellowish green color. That's where African Americans live. And the orange color is where Latino residents live. And blue dots are white residents. So Milwaukee is one of the most segregated regions in the whole United States, and that map just directly shows the pattern. So this is the first element, housing segregation. The second element of the spatial mismatch hypothesis is jobs, where the jobs are. I think for people who are in planning and hopefully in the design field, looking at Google Maps relatively can make sense, I hope. Google Map image. You can easily tell that the yellow circle is the downtown of Milwaukee. It's the very dense grids of streets and small blocks, and seems high-rise buildings. And all the other grayish area are either residential or parks or open spaces. And in the same way that you can see, I circled some pink circles there. those are employments, those are the jobs, kind of industrial parks, warehouses, factories, etc. They're spread around, you can tell, further away from the center, from the central business district. So this is the second element. Jobs have suburbanized or grow faster in the suburban areas, in addition to the downtown, in addition to the central business district. And the third element of spatial mismatch is transportation, right? So this is the transit routes, the main transit routes in the Milwaukee region. And where you roughly can see a boundary of the service area, right? So that's the boundary of Milwaukee County. And suburban counties, some of them, a few of them have limited transit services, but not as extensive as the Milwaukee County transit system. In other words, transit services in Milwaukee are not connected. So they have different county take care of different transit system. So the Milwaukee transit system, can say they reach out, they extend out a little bit to the suburban counties, but very limited services, as you can imagine. So these are the real data, real services. Now, Milwaukee is a typical region that has the spatial mismatch. So all the three previous maps showed residential segregation in the central city, jobs in the suburbs. Then the transit does not connect the residents with all those suburban job opportunities. So what's the solution to solve the spatial mismatch? If I live here in the central city, jobs are so far away, transit system is not good. What are the solutions? Conceptually, there are three causes, and that's the reason conceptually there are three types of solution. About housing is to address the housing segregation. So moving housing to jobs. Usually the policy is affordable housing, incentives, vouchers, etc. I'll go through them quickly because that's talking about housing is one semester's classes. Conceptually, another solution is to address the second cause, jobs. So bring jobs back to the central city. Economic development strategies, tax credits, incentives for business, etc. Those are the typical solutions. Then the third solution is transportation. Changing housing, changing jobs are very difficult. Then we provide good transportation services to connect them. Is it the best solution? We can debate about it. Probably not. So transportation probably is the second best solution, but it's relatively easy to be implemented, to be accepted. So transportation solution could be the second best choice. So here comes then the research project funded by National Science Foundation. And this is the exact title of our NSF project and proposal. And I want to emphasize it's user-centered. We kind of reshaped the decision-making process to provide mobility, to provide the transportation services. So we call it user-centered. Why is user-centered? Who are the users? Right? Residents in the central city, jobs in the suburban areas. So obviously, two groups of users. The labor force who live here want to go to work, and the business who are located out there. And you know the labor force shortage, right? So this is the perfect storm for our project. Business have such a strong motivation to attract workers that come into their service. So all of them have strong motivation and they participate in our projects. So those are the two groups of users. And our process is slightly different from a lot of conventional planning process. We separate them, right? We talk to them in separate groups. Your comments are separated. We don't want to mix your comments and getting into the middle ground. We want to see, probably you want different transportation services. Let's see, right? We didn't know, let's figure it out. So during our planning process, we have these two groups of users, residents or labor force participants who want to find jobs, and business who want to attract workers. We have our first meeting, we have our second meeting. It was a very fast pace because it's a research project. Then we got funding to implement it. But let me still focus on the planning process a little bit. So for the planning process, for conventional transportation planning process, because it's so complex, because there are so many things going on, usually the transportation planning agencies go in, have some specific alternatives, then evaluate those alternatives. We take a step back, we say, well, we don't have specific suggestions yet. We want to hear from you, your experience, your needs, your knowledge about the transportation system in the region. So we propose in the first meeting very broad option, and all these broad options can be easily understood by the participants, either the labor force or the business. So very broad. The first time is on-demand door-to-door service. I request the service from home, directly go to work, Uber, Lyft, right? And people can easily, okay, that's Uber, Lyft. And everybody easily understand it's very costly, it's very expensive, but it's fast. So there is a trade-off here. The second option is that it's still on demand, so I request the service, but let a few of us getting into a predetermined stops. So we get into a relatively central location, then take the service, take the transportation vehicle, whatever, to get to jobs. So it's a little bit cheaper for sure because people share the rides, then split the cost. But I need time to get to those predetermined stops, right? So in a way, it's medium speed and medium cost. And the example is Uber Pool, right? Uber Pool is always cheaper than Uber just because people share the costs. Then the third option is to leverage the transit system, the transit maps that I show, leverage the transit system. Transit stops at the county boundary between Milwaukee and suburban county, right? So another option is that we provide the on-demand service at the last stop of the transit system, then bring people from the last stop to the business locations. So it's what we call first mile, last mile connection, which is a popular term in transportation field. You probably heard about it. But it's slow, right? People need to take the transit, get to the last stop, request the service, then transfer to get down the vehicle to the job location. Then the three groups. Everybody, like all the business, all the labor force, they understand the three broad options. Can you guess which option that labor force choose and which option the business choose? Do you have a speculation?
I'm going to guess that the user chooses on demand.
Right, yeah. This one?
The on-demand door-to-door service.
Right. It's fast.
It's yeah.
I want it. Yeah. It's so easy for me to understand. Right? Yeah.
And the business maybe choose the third one because it has lowest cost.
Yeah, right. Yeah, business probably want to, oh, what if they ask me? Well, now it's a research project, right? But down the road, actually, we did ask what kind of service eventually after the research you think you can support. So business part, oh, yeah, the lowest cost, I probably can chip in something. Well, and actually some businesses across the country and even for some business in Milwaukee, they did also some business choose that. They just don't pay the full cost here. They say we subsidize our employees, compensate you, a few dollars for your trip if you use that service. So they contract out with Uber, Lyft type of companies. Anyway, in our research, because we focus on the central city labor force and suburban business, the residents, the labor force participants in the central city, they choose this one. And they understand to sustain the service, they cannot request very expensive. Right, we all want the fast and most convenient services, but in our mind, we also calculate, oh my God, what's the cost? What's the cost to me? And right now, even it's research project, the cost is not, imposed on them. Most of the cost not imposed on them. They still need to think about sustainability of the project. So labor force choose this one. they want the predetermined stops in their residential neighborhoods. So they can walk there, their friends can drop them off at the stops, then go to work. So easy and relatively fast and relatively okay cost. And business want this one. First, they're thinking about, I need to chip in probably, or they are asking us to chip in. And second, this is my observation. They want to see the service. They want to understand it. So for them, the last stop of the transit system is what they can see. All this employment in the suburban regions, right? They don't really know the central city, the location, the service. What do you mean predetermined stops? Where are they, right? They're not familiar with the neighborhoods. They do not operate business in. But they can see the bus stops a mile away from my business. So I can understand the service back and forth between the bus stops and my location. So business overwhelmingly would prefer this one. Okay, so two group of users, we talk to them separately and they come up with different ideas, right? And this is the initial design. This is the initial design. Employment locations, right? All those employment locations in the suburban county. Then this is where the labor force lived. And essentially the labor force participants say, well, we want this location as the predetermined stops. So this is the second option, on-demand predetermined stops. These are the three locations of community centers, of schools, of grocery stores, of a healthcare facilities, etc. So these are the locations that they are familiar with, have a very high traffic volume, and they say that we can easily go there and feel safe to stay there and wait for the vehicles to pick them up, drop them off. So this is the three stops that preferred by the labor force participants. And business preferred the third option, the last mile connection. So they identify these stops. Last mile is at the boundary of the county. Then they expect the labor force to take transit here, then request the last mile solution to their businesses that are located in different parts of these employment zones. This is the initial design. And we are a research project. And we were only piloting. So initially we didn't get a lot of ridership. You need words out. You need people to understand our service, which is a little bit complex here. And during the first month, when we realized that our ridership was low, so we immediately changed the service design. Okay, so we were just expanding. So just expanding the last mile solution, the stop 1 to 2, into that green zone there. So you can request service not only from stop 1 and 2, you can request service anywhere from that green zone. Yes, Sarah agrees. From green zone, anywhere in that green zone, you don't need to go to the last stop. From the green zone back to the employment location. Similarly, we expanded stops 3, 4, 5 into that residential zone. So anywhere in that zone is basically where labor force live. It's a larger zone. Anywhere in that zone, you can request services going between where you live and the employment location. And if you request services back and forth between the green zones, then you don't need to pay anything. It's still the last mile solution. It's very close to the employment. You don't need to pay in our pilot. If you request service from the yellow zone closer to home, you pay $150. It's still very low fare, right? $150. You request jobs from where you live to the employment zones. Just give you an idea from the southeast corner of the residential zone to the northwest corner of the employment zone. This is the longest distance, right? Theoretically, longest distance that our service cover is 10-mile distance. So theoretically, something could request service from the southeast and into the employment in the northwest, but only pay $150. It's heavily subsidized for sure right now because it's a research project. Okay, so this is what our service like. You can request service back and forth between this room and the employment zone. Similarly, back and forth between this residential and the employment zones. And it's on demand, you request services. And it's micro transit. That means a few people get together, share the rides on that minivans. Digital divide is not a problem anymore. 94 to 95% of our participants have smartphones and they use smartphones and different apps. So we don't worry about that too much. So they have smartphones, and we also have a call center so that people just keep calling if the smartphones does not work. We also try to connect our vehicles, our services with the company bus system. So the transit service help us to advertise our project and collaborate with us. Service is available 4:30 in the morning until 11:30. And it's on weekdays, and our pilot implementation soft launch in February, and our research part of the project ends in October, the end of our NSF funding. And the service is accessible to all. You cannot see the title. It's wheelchair accessible. Usually Uber, Lyft, they cannot guarantee wheelchair accessible vehicles. And that's the reason we rule them out pretty early on. And calling option for those without a smartphone I mentioned. And we also issue vouchers for those people who do not have bank accounts, which prevent them from using the smart apps. And we sell vouchers, then they can put the promotion code in the app. Okay, so those are our project. Is there any question? Like kind of overall our surveys, etc. Okay, I'll talk about the real impacts. Our project is politically successful and actually economically successful because we have additional sustainable funding down the road. I'll talk about it. But the reason of the success is that we have very strong partners with a lot of people. So we're here, I was at Milwaukee and here, and now University of Florida. The other important partner for us is the Regional Transportation Planning Agency in the Greater Milwaukee region. It's called Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. So we're the core team. And we partner with Milwaukee County Transit System. And VIA is the company provide the service. It's a microtransit service company. It's like Uber, but microtransit for microtransit. Mobilize is a nonprofit organization coordinating transportation system, transit services in the Greater Milwaukee region. And they were the partner eventually got the state funding. And over there, we worked with business organizations in the suburban county. Though they talked a lot with the business partners in their suburban county. And we also worked with workforce development boards of Milwaukee County and suburban counties. So we work with the groups that represent labor forces, represent businesses, represent transportation services, and we get everybody together. And of course, we have our other partners, local governments, neighborhood groups, and the media. And this is our launch event in March. We soft launch in February, just test the vehicles, test the route, etc. Then at that time, the Waukesha County, the suburban county executive, Milwaukee County executive, at that time acting mayor of Milwaukee, and now he's the mayor of Milwaukee. They all agreed to participate in our launch event to help us to get the words out. I show these slides just to show that the project is successful. Part of the reason is the political support. But the reason for the political support is that this is such a serious issue that Milwaukee County and the suburban county and the cities, they know it's imminent. We have to solve it. It's so severe, but we haven't solved it until our project. We also have other participants from all over, so including our university's vice chancellor, just to show how research project can contribute to the communities. Then we got, of course, a lot of media coverage from the local news to the TV to a lot of different media coverage. And the travel demand, the demand is growing. This is starting from March to October. This is the number of rides, so number of trips that people take. And you can see it's just, growing steadily. And then this is the riders. So that one is a number of trips, but some people take rides a lot, some people do not take rides a lot. So this is the riders, how many people using the services. Darker blue shows returning, so continuing using it, and lighter blue shows new riders. This is a crucial slide. It's the cost per ride, cost per trip. In March, it's expensive. Then with more rides and with more people using the service, the cost declines. It's still very expensive when we add the research aspect of it. And because our research still has some limitation, we need to screen the participants who can use our service. We're a research project where we're recording the data. Then after October, it moves into the next phase, which is the public. Then we lift the screening of the participants. But then we don't have data for them. And how come we can lift the research limitation that have continued service? How can we have that? In June 2022, so that's 3 months after we launch our research project, then Wisconsin governor announced $4.2 million, saying this money is for you to sustain and expand FlexRide Milwaukee, our service. So our research project ended in October. Then part of that funding helped the service to continue until March this year, then expanding the service into different areas, into different neighborhoods. Okay, so evaluation of our project. Initially, we say it's user-centered service, right? That's the user-centered service meet the goals of people. Are they okay? Are they good? Should we implement this kind of user-centered planning process down the road? So we had that planning, we have the design. Then during the pilot implementation, we screen participants. And we have the pre-pilot survey, post-pilot survey, and track them and understand who are our riders and their experience with our surveys. So this just roughly shows the demographics of our riders, okay? And you should look at them in that by column. Just a reminder, the free zone, right? It's very close to the employment locations. That zone is employment by business. That zone represents the service preferred by business. And the pay zones is closer to where residents live, where they're home. So that pay zone is preferred by the labor force participants. So the pre zone and pay zone reflect the different preference by the two user groups. And at the end of the day, 2/3 of the riders used only the pay zone. And 10% of the riders use both zones, and only 25% of the riders use only the pay zone, the one preferred by the business. And we also question whether because they are, gender, income, race, if that affect how they choose the different zones. It turned out no. So those social demographic characteristics do not affect whether they use the pay zone or the free zone. What we found out, and it actually is so natural, it's no brainer. Where they live affects where they use service. Of course, right? All those orange dots shows the housing location of the riders who use this. Of course, they live in or around this zone. Then they just come in here and request service. And blue dots shows the people who their residential location. I live here and use this. Some of them live a little bit further away, but apparently they come into this free zone that request service. And the purple dots shows the residential location of the riders who use both zones. One day I use the pay zone, one day I use the free zone. But overall, majority of them, where I live, that's where I use the service. Supposed to be no-brainer, like, right? Supposed to be natural. And I'll quickly show you the maps of the rides, the trips, right? This is from home to work, where I live. I request service to work, where I got dropped off on my to work. So you can see some concentration, some clusters in the residential zones, but you can really see the hottest spot here, right? So a lot of people still using transit service. This is a last stop. This is kind of a major last transit stop. A lot of people come here and request service into different parts of this zone. I want to see that hotspot of drop-off location is FedEx. And when we were talking about sustainable funding, FedEx, you have so many people use our service. They say because they're a huge corporation, they cannot make the decision to support as we wish JP, because they have to go through many layers of corporate discussion process. So this is work to home. So the request service is on the way back home. Many of them request services again, of course, FedEx and other businesses, and coming back to home. So it's spread it a little bit. Okay. That's basically our services and our evaluation. What we found out for sure is that most riders prefer the service that designed, preferred by the labor force participants. Right? Only 25%, 30% of the riders who used the service that's preferred by the business groups. So here is my questions for you. First, why did service like FlexRide Milwaukee? Sorry, that's the name of our service. I never specifically explained that, right? FlexRide Milwaukee is what we call our microtransit services. Why did services like FlexRide Milwaukee did not exist before our pilot? And again, our pilot was funded by research funding. Research funding is supposed to do research. It's not supposed to sustain a transportation services for the communities, right? We're only launching, we're only experimenting, we're only testing it, but somebody need to carry it. Then the flip side of it is like, why service like this didn't exist before the research funding come in? And apparently the region needs it. So that's the first question for you. And second question is that, okay, now the research is done. Okay, yeah, for sure, we got $4.2 million, but that can only carry the service for this long, 2 years. Down the road, still, the region, the local governments and the business and all those communities still need to figure out funding to move it forward, to sustain it. By that time, which service? Right, remind you, there are two services, right? One is closer to the business, one is further away, but it's closer to where people live. It's more likely to continue after the pilot. Which one will get more support? The support means political, financial, social, economic, community support, right? Which one would more likely to get support to be sustained? And I'll stop here so that you can ponder on these questions. And I would love to hear from you, your thoughts on either of the question. And if you want to ask me questions before you answer my question, that's also fine. So let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hu. For those of you who are online, and I know we have several of you who are online, please feel free to unmute yourself or type your question into the chat. For those of you who joined a little later, we're going to be posting a recording of Dr. Hu's talk on YouTube. So I'll stop and see if any of the students in the room have any questions. So I actually, I'll get things started. I have a question, Dr. Hu. In terms of sustainability of this, I couldn't help but think, and I know this was live work, but I couldn't help but draw the parallels between live healthcare services, because in healthcare, it's an ongoing issue in terms of accessibility, especially when we're looking at urban communities that are circled by rural communities.
Right.
And so in terms of your point about sustainability, in terms of your research, did you find was the cost benefit to either individual businesses or a collection of businesses within a certain industry related as to why they might want to support something like this initiative to sustain it? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. Well, I try to understand the access to healthcare initially when I was collecting data, and I figure out healthcare is so complex. So physical access is one small part of it. There is also the insurance where I got coverage, what kind of service I need. Some type of services are spread in different locations. But well, coming to this Flexer in Milwaukee, in our service design, we did try to consider it as much as we can. So initially, when we had the predetermined stops, right? One of the stops is kind of a community center with grocery and with healthcare facilities there. So we figure it might be a center for people to go. Well, it might be a center of people's activity, right? That activity could include healthcare, could include a lot of other things. And that's the reason the stop is decided for that location. Also on the employment side of it, we do have healthcare facilities in the employment zones. And we did talk to them in terms of how we can provide better access to you. But then that healthcare is very far away from the central city. So we do not see many demands to request service so from the city neighborhoods into that suburban healthcare facilities, because still it's far away and people try to get to the health services closer to them if it's available to them. We do consider that. I want to add on top of the healthcare another layer, childcare. This is also discussed in our project initially. And the 4.2 million down the road will support access to childcare. But this is a transportation services, right? You need car seats in the vehicles. So that's one of the consideration for the next phase. And then the locations of the stops, right? Then that consider the childcare facilities and childcare centers. But we do have a lot of consideration even in our research pilot. We understand so many people want to drop off kids, then go to work, right? It's impossible for research. For those of you who don't know that, right, we need to go through the internal review for research projects, and youth, let alone kids, are almost impossible to include in our research project like transportation. So now the research constriction is lifted when we try to put the childcare services and car seats in the vehicles. We're still thinking about whether that can significantly improve the ridership, the usage of our service. Just imagine, because it's on demand, you still need to wait a few minutes, up to 15 minutes for the vehicles to go. 5 to 15, yeah. Yeah, you still need to wait if you have a case in the cold Milwaukee weather, right? So that's another layer of the design of the stops, where we choose the stops to have a comfortable location, not only for the adults, but the kids etc., etc. So childcare is a huge barrier, it's a huge concern. But at the same time, the reason it was not successfully addressed before, also because of these realistic reasons.
We have a question online that's tangentially related to that. Was there any attempt to organize the assisted multifamily properties owners to participate in the solutions? Assisted multifamily properties often cluster spatially.
Yes, Bill, yes, we did. And again, in one of those predetermined stops, one of the stop is called Silver Spring neighborhood. If you look for Silver Spring neighborhood in Milwaukee, you would find out that is one of the largest public housing complex in Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin. And it's a new type of public housing complex. It has childcare, it has community centers, it has school and playgrounds and all those different services. And that's the reason we chose it as a stop initially. And we worked with the neighborhood center. We worked with the directors and the community organizers there. They help us to put our surveys of our flyers out, and they help us to spread the words. They were one of the people who told us, we try to promote our services through social media, through the media you see, the TV, the news, etc. And the Silver Spring neighborhood was one of the groups told us, you need word of mouth promotion. So we put some of their staff on the rise so that at least the staff get a sense of how to use the service, how convenient is the service, is it safe, is it comfortable, etc. Then the staff tell their residents or the users of their services how they feel about the service. So yes, we work with them, and it was a great collaboration.
Great question. Again, any other questions, please feel free to type into the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask them that way as well. Oh, great, thank you. So what matrices and comprehensive framework do you use to judge if the project, not the research project, but the actual implemented project is successful, and why?
Right, so there are so many layers of this question, and for sure, evaluation is one of the deliverables for our project. And the top layer, we were asked this question by the one of the program directors of NSF when they had regularly checking with us. That was the initial part of the project. They asked us, how do you define the success of a NSF project? We were like, oh, the partnership, the pilot, etc., etc. By June, we gave them an answer. It's $1 million project. Then the state put in $4.2 million to sustain the project. For us, our response to NSF is that your investment has huge returns from our project. And well, of course, we want it to go beyond the 4.2 million, etc. So this is a superficial or political answer to this question. So in a way, our research project is successful because it raised the awareness and it formed a force to have a new service in the region, solve real questions. Okay, another layer of the response, another layer of evaluation is the cost benefit analysis, which is down to earth, but at the same time, that's the essential element for sustaining the service. I showed a graph that at the end of our research pilot, the cost per ride is close to $50 per trip. It's huge. It's huge. So we hope that our targeting cost per ride is actually $15 to $20 per ride. You think it's expensive? It's the average price for many transit agencies, etc. So that's our target cost per ride. We haven't got there again because the research has a lot of limitation. We have to screen participants, right? Just by screening, a lot of people, and I'm not using the service, right? After October, but it's another difficulty. After October, we lift the research restriction, but then we don't have data about people. But we know that the ridership continues to grow after that, and every month is significant steady growth. That means the cost per ride steadily decline. So in a sense, we're very optimistic that we will have a realistic cost per ride. Then we can bring that number. Well, the team, I'm not in the future research there anymore. The team can bring that number to the business organizations, to the community organizations, to the local and regional government. See, this is a reasonable cost. You should sustain these services so that it can help the residents.
I want to ask, if that pay zone, that foreign zone, is based on the map of segregation that you showed in the first slide, or it was like based on something?
It's very closely tied to the segregation map, but it's also, we ran the boundaries with the Workforce Development Board of Milwaukee County. We ran the boundaries with the community organizations, including the Silver Spring Neighborhood Center that we talked to. We ran the boundaries with transportation agencies as well, because we want to have efficient transportation agencies. So it's a lot of discussion, but it mainly reflects the segregated African American neighborhoods.
Because
Now,
I think your data as a result that the African communities, they were the highest rate.
Right.
Service.
Right. And then the extension of the project, we were also talking about, initially we did talk about it, whether we want to also focus on or include the Hispanic neighborhoods to the south, right? Right. And we did some initial analysis. Remember, our employment zones is to the right, to the northwest. So we found out not many residents in the Latino neighborhoods go to that employment zone because it's so far away. And our research need to, initially is a pilot, right? Need to have a limited scope. And we only have $1 million. It sounds a lot, but for transportation, it's really small, right? So our scope was very limited initially. And now in the expansion and now in the future discussion, we're expanding to different residential zones, but also different employment zones as well.
But did you have any sort of graphic of employment based on the race in those two zones?
What exactly you mean employment? Like
if Hispanic goes to zone 1 or zone 2, or goes to zone 1 or zone 2?
Not specific in that way. There are so many different data sources we see. The most official data is from census. Census gave you where you live, where you go to work in the aggregate level. In the aggregate level, how many people here going to that jobs? But we don't know exactly the race, everything intersect with them. Specifically, what percentage of Hispanic residents go to that zone? What percentage of African American residents go to that zone? We don't have that data. But we do have other kind of, because we involve the labor force development boards, they have a sense. They let us know. Their data are not the official, but they have a lot of internal data as well. So we talked about exactly where we need to focus, how to draw the zones, and how many of them are really go to the employment zones. So it's worth it to connect the residential zone and the employment zones. We didn't connect them to different zones.
Based on the app that you smartphone account, so the integrated survey can be the app, so people can respond to those routes and pathways.
Right. Right. So there is quick survey because when you take a ride, you always have a very quick survey. How do you like the service, right? We of course have questions down below, but Not a lot of people answer that. And that's the reason we have our own structured, very long surveys for these participants. And they're in research.
Is there any restriction for using that? For example, people should live in specific location, have a proof of residence. For example, you as staff have similar service, but you should be a resident of a specific location to use the drop-off location.
Right. This is what we did. It's research, but at the same time, we need to be inclusive. So initially, when we reach out to people, we ask, of course, their consent to give us the data. We say we screen you so that you can participate in a research project. They submit information where they live. Are they working or are they interested in working in that employment zones? Are they 15? Are they 18 and above? That's age criteria for our research. So those are the basic criteria for us to screen residents, screen participants. If they say their residents, we just send them the codes. When I explain the codes, it's like to unlock FlexDrive Milwaukee to you. However, people find the loopholes in our app, right? Yes, exactly. So they call in, they do whatever, they use our service. We did not remove them. We keep contacting them, please sign up. It's a research, give us the data. But if they insist on not giving us the information, they keep using our service, but their data are not reflected here.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, please.
I
Yeah.
just want to ask, was it easy to get all of those agencies to like participate at the beginning of your research, like midwifery transportation service, where environments giving funding and also data at first when you do it. And also, if like the second part of like the question, do you think it would be easier to implement like circular or let other regions like all of like those also regions like transportations and something that's
So for this specific project, it's so easy for us to get that partnership. I showed the partnership slide, right? And it's so easy just because the issue has been discussed in Milwaukee region for years, tens of years, because residential segregation is fixed there for so many years. Employment suburbanization is there for so many years, and there is no transportation connection. There were some attempts before our project to solve that issue, and the attempt failed. So it's an issue on everybody's mind. Milwaukee want to solve the employment, want to increase employment for their residents. Suburban business want to have labor force work, right? We have a labor force shortage. So it's very easy. Everybody is on board. And I said, it's a perfect storm for us actually, just because of the labor force shortage, the business are so motivated. But in another way, I also want to say like, the research team, so the university and the Metropolitan Planning Organization I mentioned, the core research team, we've been working together for a long time. And then that Metropolitan Planning Organization, they have a lot of collaborations with all these different partners. So in another way, I want to say the relationship has been there for a long time as well. So when we have an opportunity to apply for funding, we immediately get together. Second question, whether it's easy to apply our model to other regions, it depends, right? It really depends. In Milwaukee, which is unique in a lot of different ways because it doesn't have a regional transit authority or regional transportation agencies, however we call it. I showed you the map of transit mainly provided by Milwaukee County, right? Not crossing the county boundary, which is pretty rare for relatively large metropolitan areas. Most large ones, top 20, top 30, whatever, top population metropolitan areas, most of them have some regional coordination in transportation services. So in other words, the challenge is greater in Milwaukee, and there is a problem that everybody wants to solve. The challenge could be less severe in other regions. Then that means there is some entity there addressing this issue already. That is a different layer of challenges. What do we do? What should we do?
So are there any other we have a few minutes left. If there's any other questions that anybody has, follow-up or anything. Okay, so again, I just want to thank our speaker, Dr. Hu, for being here. Wonderful, fascinating presentation. There's such relevant topic, and it was I could talk to you all afternoon about it. Again, we'll be posting the talk on YouTube for those of you who had to join a little bit late. Please feel free to watch that from the beginning and pass that on. We'll be circulating that as well on social media. Again, Dr. Hu, thank you so much. And wonderful presentation. We'll adjourn our Let's Talk. We will be having another Let's Talk session next Friday, and information on that will be forthcoming.